I come?
He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family or home. He didn't go to college. He never visited a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He did none of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One denied him. He was turned over to his enemies that went through a mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. And while he was dying, his executioners gambled for his garments, the only property he had on earth. And when he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, all the parliaments that have ever sat, all the kings that have ever reigned, put together have not affected the life of this man on earth as much as one solitary life.
Hi, I'm Paul Kersey, and I'm from Open Door Community Church of God, and we're going to look at the greatest man who ever lived, and that is Jesus. And we're going to look at his followers too, and what kind of impact did they make, and did he make on this world. Right off the bat, just being born made a change in how we determine time. First we determine time as BC, which is before Christ, and then we determine it as AD, which is after Christ. Also the fact that we also look at the newspapers and we can recognize that Jesus must have been here. He must have done something, because when we look at our newspapers, it has a date, and on that date it actually is an AD date, which means like 1214 this year. That's the date since Christ came here. Also, we can also look at that on the first day of the week, all his followers got together. So we recognize and we realize that there's 7 days a week, which is kind of an interesting note to say that God made the world in 7 days, and on the sixth day he rested, and we can find that. We're going to look at the fact that the teaching and example of Jesus Christ inspired the greatest acts of generosity, hospitality, self-sacrifice, and service for the poor, sick, needy over 2,000 years. The cross, the very symbol of pain and suffering, has now become the symbol of hope and sanctity of life. When we realize that Jesus died on the cross, that Bible-believing Christians really, you can see crucifixes, you can see crosses, all these things to represent that Jesus died on the cross, that he paid the price for us. And for that fact alone, realizing what he had done, that message has brought about the fact that the cross is a big symbol. And we'll look at some of that just in the world alone. If we look at one in particular, is the International Red Cross. That was founded by Christians. That was a response to Christian injunctions to care for the sick and the suffering. We look at another cross, which is called the Blue Cross. And if you know anything about insurance, a Blue Cross is one of the insurances in the United States. Also, there's a Blue Cross in United Kingdom, and that cross is for animals and the care of animals and taking care of the animals. And also, not only just in the UK, there's also, Ireland has a Blue Cross for animals also, which is interesting that the Blue Cross is, what's the benefit to animals? These are all organizations that are founded upon the Christian idea and the Christian from Jesus coming into the world. Also, there's another cross too, the Green Cross. The Green Cross, or a white cross with a green background, was used by the International Standards Organization to represent first aid. Another cross, another symbol of sanctity of life, and how they determine that they think that this is something that we should have on there, is the cross, a representation. Also, there's another cross called the Safety Orange Cross. And and it was recognized as a safety response. And it's not used as much, but you will still see that we use it when it comes to in America with people. We use the orange necessarily for represent of emergency, or also as a way of warning of what's coming up ahead. Also, Jesus was very, very, very interested in the human need, and with Christianity, we realized that before the advent of Christianity, it was a culture that practiced slavery and human sacrifice. Even the highest esteemed Greek and Roman civilizations, they practiced this. Child sacrifice was common among the pagan religions. Before Jesus Christ, human life in the Greek and Roman world was extremely cheap. Indians born with physical defects, such as blindness, were commonly abandoned to die in the wilderness. And then in Greece, the blind babies were cast into the sea. Those who survived their blind infancy or became blind later in childhood usually became galley slaves. And blind girls were commonly assigned to life of prostitution. However, Jesus Christ showed particular compassion for the blind, healing many of the blind individuals during his ministry on earth. When the Roman persecution of the church ended in the 4th century, Christians established asylums for the blind. In the 19th century, Louis Braille, a dedicated Christian who lost his eyesight at age 3, developed the world's first alphabet that enabled blind people to read with their fingers, all because of Jesus coming into the world. The Aztec Empire in Mexico and Inca Empire in Peru engaged in slavery, ritual rapes, and mass human sacrifice. Sati, the burning of widows on funeral piles of their husbands, was common practice in Hindu India before the missionary William Carey arrived. Slavery ended in England and then elsewhere as a result of the tireless efforts of Christians such as William Wilberforce, David Livingstone. Respect for life and liberty is a fruit of Christianity. The positive impact of Jesus Christ in the world cannot be overstated. Everything from education to human rights, from public health to economic liberty, the things we cherish most and many of the blessings we take for granted, all can be traced to the spiritual and cultural revolution begun by Jesus Christ. Jesus spoke. They were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority. That's in Mark 1:22. The life and teachings of an example of Jesus Christ have profoundly influenced the whole development of education worldwide. The great commission of our Lord Jesus was to make disciples of all nations and teaching them. That's in Matthew 28:19 through 20. From the very beginning, Christians were establishing schools. Christianity revolutionized education by making it available to all classes. Amongst many innovations in Christian education was that these Christian schools taught everybody, including girls and women. The Greeks and the Romans, before the birth of Christ, did not formally educate girls. Only boys from the very privileged classes obtained an education. St. Augustine observed that Christian women were better educated than the pagan male philosophers. Every branch, every level of education was pioneered by Bible-believing Christians. The concept of graded level education was first introduced by a German Lutheran, John Sturm, in the 16th century. Another Lutheran, Frederick Froebel, introduced kindergartens. Education for the deaf was also pioneered by the Christians. Most of the languages of the world were first set to writing by Christian missionaries. The first book in most languages of the world has been the Bible. Christianity has been the greatest force for promoting literacy throughout the history. Sunday schools were begun by Robert Raikes in 1780 to provide boys and girls from the poorest homes with the gift of literacy and the riches of scriptures. The Christian missionary movement in the 19th century pioneered tens of thousands of schools throughout Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, providing education for countless millions, even in their most jungles, giving the gift of literacy to tribes that have never had a written language. The phenomenon of education for the masses has its roots in Christianity. The pursuit of the knowledge of God in a systematic philosophical, and in-depth way gave rise to the phenomena of universities all around the world. It was the Christian faith that gave rise to the very idea of higher learning. Dr. James Kennedy said this: "Every school you see, public or private, religious or secular, is a visible reminder of the religion of Jesus Christ. So is every college and university." The first universities grew out of monastery missionary centers, which had disciplined Europe. The first university lecturers were the missionary monks who had collected books, accumulated libraries, and copied manuscripts. They were unique, equipped for advanced academic study. Most universities became as Christian schools, including Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, Heidelberg, and Basel. The very name university testifies to its Christian origins. University means one truth. Isn't it time that teachers and lecturers and professors took an in-depth look at the greatest teacher the world has ever known, the greatest book ever produced, and the faith which inspired and pioneered every major branch of education and science? The Bible is the greatest book of literature. The greatest invention in the field of learning was the printing press. Johann Gutenberg was also a fruit of the Christian faith. The first book to be written was the Bible. More books have been written about Jesus Christ than any other person in history. The God-man Jesus, his teachings, are the central emphasis to the most sold and most universally published ever, the Bible. Let's look at what Christianity has done in science. It's an irrefutable fact is that Christianity gave birth to modern science. It is significant that the early pioneers in the modern science were men of deep Christian faith. The scientific revolution began with the Protestant Reformation, and the Bible played a vital part in the development of scientific discovery. Every major branch of science was developed by a Bible-believing Christian. Christians such as Louis Pasteur had fueled some of the greatest practical advances in medicine. For Copernicus, the first astronomer of the scientific revolution, God was personally responsible for all the activity in the heavens. That's what he said. His radical ideas were contained in his book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, which was published in 1543, the year of his death. The regularity he was discovering in the movements of the planets was for him a manifestation of the faithfulness of a loving creator. Galileo, in 1642, invented the hydrostatic balance and discovered the laws of dynamics from observing of falling bodies. However, he is chiefly known for his achievements in astronomy. He discovered of the 4 satellites of Jupiter on January 7, 1610, with the aid of the newly invented telescope, revolutioning the study of astronomy. He had been called the first modern scientist, and his work confirmed the observations of Copernicus. He regarded his science as illuminating the work of the Creator. For all his quarreling with the church, he remained a devout Christian until he died. He died in 1642. Kepler, the German astronomer, a contemporary of Galileo, was also a devout Christian. He discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion, laid the foundation for Newton's theory of gravity. He regarded his study of the physical universe as thinking God's thoughts after him. In The Secret of the Universe, he wrote, "Here we are, concerned with the book of nature, so greatly celebrated in secret writings. It is in this that Paul proposes to the Gentiles that they should contemplate God, like the sun in water or in a mirror. Why then, as Christians, should we take any less delight in the contemplation? Since it is for us, with the true worship, to honor God, to venerate him, and to wonder at him. The more rightly we understand the nature and scope of what our God has founded, the more devoted the spirit in which this is done." Scientific leadership passed in the next generation to Newton. Born in the year of Galileo's death, as a member of Anglican Church, he was involved in distribution of Bibles to the poor and construction of new churches. He actually wrote more than 1 million words on the Bible and theological topics, and more than he even wrote on science. His well-worn Bible, with marginal notes in his own handwriting, is in the Wren Library of Trinity College, Cambridge. He became the foremost mathematician in England. He published Principia Mechanica in 1667, a book that transformed the course of Western science. His work gave new direction to optics, mechanics, and celestial dynamics. His work on gravity established the Cambridge reputation for mathematics. His studies of light produced the first reflecting telescope. His invention of calculus gave science the mathematical tool it needed for further exploration of the trails he blazed. Okay, we talked about some older scientists. Let's talk about some scientists today. According to the February 20th, 2014 edition of Christianity Today, there are at least 2 million scientists that recognize themselves as evangelical Christians. Of these scientists, percent-wise, they are more active in their faith than the average American evangelical. In this survey, the evangelical scientists were more likely to attend church-related services, read religious material, and pray multiple times a day. Let's look at another area. Let's look at law and legal framework. The Bible, particularly the Ten Commandments, laid the framework and the legal foundations of Western civilization. The very first statute, the first written restriction on the powers of government, was the Magna Carta of 1215. And it was written by a pastor, Archbishop Stephen Langton. And 30 sections of the scripture principles. The law, the rule of law, the separation of powers, checks and balances, representative government was results of Christian influence and resulted in the U.S. Constitution. Influence of Christianity led also to the greatest art, painting, and music. The Sistine Chapel, the ceiling painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512, is a cornerstone work of the high Renaissance art. The Last Supper is the late 15th century mural painted by Leonardo da Vinci in the Rectorium of the Convent of Santa Maria Mila. It is one of the world's most famous paintings and one of the most studied, scrutinized, and satirized. The Messiah, composed by George Friedrich Handel in 1741. After initial modest public reception, it gained popularity and eventually became one of the best known and most frequently performed choir works in Western history. There's also things that we take for granted. Let's just consider some everyday things that we say. The word breakfast or breakfast comes from the concept of breaking the fast. The very word goodbye comes from a parting prayer, God be with you. The word holiday comes from holy day. The word restaurant comes from Jesus' promise in Matthew 11:28, come to me all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The first restaurant founded in Paris in 1766 placed that verse from Matthew 11:28 in bold letters outside the first public establishment dedicated to providing meals in a pleasant atmosphere. When we get in a car, when we start an engine, turn on the lights, drive to a hospital, receive an anesthetic before an operation, have an effective operation, done in a germ-free environment, we need to remember that we owe it all to Jesus Christ. Christianity has been the most powerful agent in transforming society for the better across 2,000 years. No other religion, philosophy, teaching, nation, or movement has changed the world for the better as Christianity has done. Jesus Christ is the center, the focus of it all. He is the ideal of the heart, the goal of humanity. He had the heart of a child. He had the tenderness of a woman and the strength of a man. His greatness leads us to see God, the Father, Creator, Almighty, and His love for us.